computer. There we go. Screen. Right. So, can you guys see my screen? Zihai, can you see my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, I guess I'm going to start. So hello everyone, my name is Ryan and I'm a first year CE student at the University of Waterloo, and today we're going to be talking about APIs. So first of all, before we talking about APIs, we're going to talk about HTTP, which is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It's basically the protocol of the web, and it enables connections between the client and servers. So the most common request types that you're going to see are GET and POST requests. Post requests, which we'll be talking about in this presentation. And note that the requests I'm going to talk about are only guidelines. They're only guidelines for which request type to use in the backend. So, for example, sometimes you might see a GET request being done to put data into the server. That's technically allowed, but it's not encouraged. So first of all, let's go over GET requests. So what are GET requests? Well, GET requests are the type of request that gets data from servers. So most browsers use it to retrieve a website, retrieve the HTML data, the JavaScript, the CSS, but this type of request should not modify the resource being retrieved. So let's say, for example, right here, this is from the Google Translate API, method project.getLanguages. As you can see here is HTTP request, get HTTP/translation, and it gets the supported languages, right? So after I send this request to Google, it should not change the supported languages that are supported by Google Translate. The next request type we're going to talk about is POST request. POST request is what you do to modify server resource. And there's usually a response data from the server. So let's say here, what happens if you want to translate text using Google Translate? Well, you use a POST request. So what we do is that we could post the data, post the sentence you want to translate, the language information to Google. And what Google does is that it will respond with the translated data. So the third type is pretty common. It's called put request. This is usually used for uploading data, which means that there should not be any major side modifications to the data. Say, for example, you want to upload some files onto, say, Google Cloud or Google Drive. You don't want Google to be modifying the file that you uploaded. So that's why put requests are there. As you can see here, Google Cloud Storage. To upload an object, we use the put request, put/object. Now, there are many other type of requests, including head, delete, patch, and options. However, these request types are not used very often, so you probably don't need to know them. Now, next is query parameters. So as you can see in this URL, in this website request, we have the URL, which is www.phoneshop.com. And we have this question mark. This question mark is begin query string. And after that, you have a key pair, which is the parameter name and the parameter value. Now to separate, say for example, you want to have multiple different parameters. Well, you could use a ampersand to separate them. So you can see here, product equals iPhone, size equals 32, color equals white. Those are all parameters. Say for example, if you go on a Google search, and let's just type in MasseyHacks, right? You can see here that in Google's URL, it's google.com/search and then begin query. Source equals HP, as you can see here, Q equals MasseyHacks. This is your query. So you could technically change this to anything you like, and it will query that. Next thing is headers. Requests can contain additional information, including file type, authentication, language, sometimes even IP address in the header information. Now, headers are in a key pair format. So as you can see here, we have one example header is authentication and : this authentication key corresponds to bearer access token. Now the request body. Request body are data that are to be sent and uploaded, which is usually in JSON or XML format. Now for authentication. So a lot of the APIs that you will use require authentication because they limit the usage, or some of them cost money for usage. Say for example, Google Translate. Google Translate I think costs around $20 for 1 million characters, so it needs an API key to keep track of that. Some of the most common authentications are basic HTTP authentication or API key and OAuth. So the most basic HTTP authentication / API key. The most basic type of authentication is you'll probably see is probably bearer tokens, where you have authentication header, and in the value you put bearer and then authentication, the access token. Or you can have API key as a query parameter. In this Google Translate documentation, you can see get HTTP / translate Google Translate, and in the query parameters you can see key string, a valid API key to handle requests for this URL. So you will put your API key as a query parameter. Say for example, HTTP translate right here, key equals, put whatever key that you are given, and target equals EN to translate to English. OAuth is a different authentication method. The client retrieves an access token from the authentication OAuth server, and the client uses that access token to access the resource. This improves the security. So what you do is send authentication request and an authentication grant. For the authorization server, you will actually be given an access token on top of your private key probably, and you would use that to access the actual resource. But the issue is that OAuth, as you can see before on the previous slide, was pretty complex. So for a lot of the APIs, big APIs that use OAuth, you will probably see a lot of either Python, libraries or some other stuff that will make their usage a lot easier. In this case, for Google APIs, you'll be able to see Google has made a Python client, which makes using their service a lot easier. Now, the common response codes, you're going to see this very often. In fact, a lot of you probably have seen 404, which is resource not found. So the most common one that you should see, you want to see, is 200, which means request successful. This is what you get when you send a request, and the request has been successfully processed by the server, and either something is sent back or some change has been done. 400 bad request is usually relating to the syntax of the request. So what that means is that, say for example, on the previous slide, you didn't put a key tag, or you put key equals and then put some random gibberish that's not your key, or some weird stuff that it can't process. That's the error code you will get. 401 unauthorized is if you put a wrong API key, or if you don't have authorization to use that resource. So if you're using Google Cloud and you're seeing 401 errors, that probably means you didn't enable the cloud resource on your account. 404 file not found, that's usually relating to URL, where you're posting to the wrong URL or wrong server. Now, what is a JSON? Well, JSON is very similar to a Python dictionary. It consists of key pairs and arrays. So I'll show you a demo of JSON in a bit. Right here, you can see JSON. We start by starting the curly brace, and then orders. Orders is the key, and then the value is this array, which is in. Now for some API examples. Let's say, for example, we want to access the GitHub API. So how do we do that? Well, let's go for GitHub API. So you can see here, we can find GitHub API version 3. Here, first of all, we're gonna go for authentication. So say, for example, OAuth authentication API. List your grants and stuff. You can probably read this through and get authenticated, but what if we want to, say, for example, access a repository, right? Let's see in here, GitHub repositories. A lot of the APIs will list get/user/repos. So what you want to do is that you want to find the base URL. Usually it's somewhere in here. Yeah, like this. So your base URL is https://apis.github.com. And then what's after that is this right here, /user/repos. So right now, let's try to get this repo. Try to get someone's list of repos. Let's go for now, for this workshop, I'm going to use Python because most of you will probably know Python. So I'm going to use replit, repl.it, just because that's the easiest one to show you code and console side by side. Feel free to use idle if you want, or PyCharm. Great, go. So if we want to query, if you want to send requests to this API, we want to first import a library called requests. Now, request allows us to make API requests, HTTP requests, sorry. So we're also going to import PP print, which is pretty print. It allows us to see the JSON and the content better. So pprint. This is not necessary if you're actually going to use this or something. This is just printing it to the console nicer so we can actually see. All right, so let's say repositories, right? So currently, you can see here, it says list repositories for authenticated user. So what if we don't want to be authenticated? Well, let's see, is there unauthenticated? List repositories for a user. This does not require authentication. As you can see here, this is a GET request, and it's getting the URL /users. This colon username is going to be replaced with the person's username that you want to query, and /repos. Let's copy that over. Equals request dot. Let's see here. As you can see, it's a GET request. So request.get. And then here we'll put the URL. The base URL is https /users. Let's say I'll get mine repos. Feel free to put your username in there and see what you get. So request equals response equals request.get. This sends a GET request. Now we want to put pp print just to print out what we get as a response. .json. You can hear if we run it, wow, we get a lot of stuff. So if we take a look, all my repositories are in this JSON. So let's continue reading this API documentation. In here we have parameters. Parameters can be type, all, owner, member, sort, direction. Well, you know what? Let's try to sort the repositories. So to add as you can see here, it's a parameter. Before in the presentation, I talked about question mark, how to add parameters. It's question mark and then the thing we want. So let's say sort equals Created. Let's go for created. And which direction do we want to sort it? All right. In here, we can see direction string can be ascending or descending. Let's go for created. Direction equals ASC. Actually, let's go for descending. Right. What this does is that it gets my repos, and sorts it by the created date, and the direction of the sort is descending. Let's try to run this. Now, because I have a lot of repos, you might not see any change because there are just way too many projects. But you just have to trust me on this. So next, how about we try to get a web page, right? As I told you from the presentation, browsers use GET requests to retrieve a website. Say, for example, what if we want to scrape a website? So web scraping is getting the URL, getting a web page and automatically getting data from that web page. Let's see here. So let's comment this out. And get. So what URL do we want to query? Do we want to say get? Say, let's query the MasseyHacks website. CA. Right, and here we will pp print. Here we'll use text because the MasseyHacks website is a HTML page, so that's not a JSON. pp print text. Let's see. Scroll down. So you can see here, this is the HTTP, not HTTP, HTML of the MasseyHacks website. It's pretty cool. You could loop through every single line of this HTML and get information about this web page. So this is how browsers use it to get websites as when you enter a URL onto the URL bar. So next, let's try to play around with GET requests, right? Let's try to play around with the POST request, sorry. So POST request is about sending data to the server. For now, we don't have any servers to send to, so there's a handy website called HTTP bin, which is good for testing out requests. You can see here, HTTP request, testing out different verbs. And here, /post, requests post parameters. So let's try to post to this website. HTTP bin. Right, /post. And as I said, post is about uploading data onto a server or sending data to a server. So before we start that, let's give it a payload or the data that you want to send. Payload, let's say something. Value key. So we want to send this data to HTTP bin /post using a post request. Now, how do we add the payload? How do we add the data? Well, we want to put a comma here and put data equals payload. Now for the response, let's do a pp print to see what response we get. So what this will do is that this will post this data, this key value, to https://httpbin.org/post. Right. What we expect to see is that it will return the same information back. Wait, response.json, sorry. Yeah, there we go. So you can see here, this is the information we get back. This is a JSON. So you can see here, heading, we didn't put any headings, so it uses default headings, user agent, Python request, everything. So form, well, this is key, value key. You can see here, wait. And the origin, you can see the origin IP and the URL. And yeah, the data we sent it is the data we get back, which means it is correct. So before I continue, is there any questions? Hold on, I'm just gonna open the.
This is sort of my question, but what's the difference between a 201 and a 200?
201 and a 200.
Yeah.
So let's see here. Okay, so I don't have all the codes memorized, but we could just search up the code. Say for example, HTTP codes. There is no 201.
Oh, because I was watching this like random tutorial and they were talking about how
201 created.
they use like 201 instead of 200. I wasn't really sure what the difference was.
201 created, as you can read here, fulfilled and result in a new resource being created. So usually 200 is used, but 201 might be used because, say for example, you're uploading something onto Google, onto Google Drive. That upload will probably return a 201 instead of a 200 because it created a new resource or created a new folder on Google servers. That's why 201 is used.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, I'm assuming there's no questions, so let's continue. Say, for example, you want to use Google's API. Now, Google's API are a lot more complicated. Let's see, Google Translate API. Right, so for translating API. See here, let's go for basic translating text. And you can see here, Google Translating Text Basic. There are many different libraries that you will use. Normally, you will go for Python and just use the Google Translate. This is much easier than pasting the URL in and everything. But for now, let's see the REST and command line option. So as you can see here, this is a post request, post to HTTPS translate, Google Translate to translate text. And this is the body that you're supposed to send. So the query right here in the example, it's sending it to sentences to translate, and its target is DE. Here is talking about how to authenticate. Here, so authentication, bear, Google Cloud token, right? So let's see how to add that into our request. Now, I don't have an API key right now, so we're just gonna type this out and I'll teach you how to add a header. So first of all, let's create a header variable. This is gonna be a Python dictionary. Now recall that headers are key value pairs. So in order to authenticate with Google Translate, we have to put authentication as the key. And in here, we will put bear. This is a type of token. And whatever information. So let's say example key. Right. Now response post, right. So request.post. To which URL do we want to post? Well, we want to post to Google's translation service. So as you can see here, HTTPS, Google Translate, copy that over, comma. Now here's where we add the header. So we say header equals, and for our header, there we go. This will add the authentication header onto the request. So we'll be able to authenticate. Now for more complex stuff, say for example, for Cloud Translate, API references, for more advanced APIs, so translate text. As you can see here, post, same thing, except this time it doesn't tell you how to authenticate. If you scroll down to the bottom, it'll tell you authentication scopes and everything. That you'll probably have to do with, you'll probably have to use this with Google's API library. Otherwise, it'll get way too complicated. You could do manual OAuth scopes and OAuth stuff, but it just gets way too complicated and you don't want to do that. So you might have a chance that it'll mess up. So what are some other things? Well, let's go back to GitHub and check some stuff. GitHub API. So let's read this API. Say, for example, repositories. Now, how does GitHub wants you to authenticate? So let's see here, authentication. Let's look for authentication, overview, authentication, right here. So it tells you there's two ways to authenticate, and it'll tell you what the authentication will return. Okay, will be return 404 not found. This is to prevent actual leakage of your private repositories. So for basic authentication, right, curl/u, yeah, for OAuth 2 tokens, right here. So this -h, this curl command, the -h specifies that this is a header. So header authentication is the key, and then token, OAuth token, to https://github api.github.com. Let's copy that over and just show you. This will be the exact same thing as this. To api/github.com. And this is how you authenticate with GitHub or with their API. So this OAuth token, you'll probably find it in your, you have to generate an OAuth token from your account. If you go to, I believe this is the security tab, you could create an OAuth token. Now we could try to run this and see what it gives us. So let's try running this. Just refresh the page. Okay, yep. Try to run this. Unexpected key. Quest got an unexpected article. Oh, my bad. This is supposed to be headers equals header. As you can see here, documentation, message not found. Dot. Found. Status code. See here 404. So in GitHub's API, if we remember, two ways to authenticate requires authentication will return 404 not found. And that's exactly what we'll get because OAuth token is just OAuth token right now. There is no OAuth token. So let's continue reading this. There's many ways usually to authenticate to an API. Let's see here. OAuth 2 key secret. That's the way to authenticate to. And yeah. So if you want to do anything else, just look up the API, and if it requires authentication, get the authentication and request. Is there any questions? I can't check my chat. Okay. So, well, another type of authentication that I've also talked about in the API slide is that what if you have the key as a query parameter, right? So how would you add that into your request? What you would do is that you would do response equals request dot get. And what do we want to get? We want to get, let's just put an example website, https:/example.com/ and then in here, either we want to put question mark key equals, and then put your API key here, or we can also do, as you guys showing before, we could add a parameter using param is equal to, remember parameters are key value pairs. So let's say key, API key. Here, let's put our example API key. So to add that as parameter, instead of this question mark key equals, we can delete this, just have the base URL, and in here we'll put params equals param. This will automatically generate the URL and send it properly. So if there's a cool thing with this, where we could see the URL that's being sent, dot URL, requests. URL. Okay, wait. This one is, yeah, this is not getting a proper website. That's why it's having that error. So let's just use HTTP bin as the example. As you can see here, it automatically added the question mark API key equals example API key. Now, if you have multiple parameters, it will also automatically format it for you. Val key 2, val 2. Here, if we run this, we can see that, okay, I added the ampersand as it's supposed to. The first parameter is API key equals example API key, and the second parameter key equals val 2, which is all correct. Let's see here. What if we try something like a HTTP bin? Let's see what other things are here. Images. Now you could use HTTP bin to test out the different requests and see what you can do. So request formats, JSON.text. Click open these. Now this is pretty useful because you could test around with codes and see what they say. /incoming inspection, this IP, you could get your own IPs with this. We can see here that this is a GET request, and this is /IP on top of the base request URL, which in this case is http bin/IP. And in here, we can see that it doesn't mention or doesn't take any extra. So we click on it, response type. See, it responds in a JSON format, and code 200 is the code that will respond with if it can perform its operation, and what it will return is the requester's IP address. So let's try that. P, there should be no parameters. Response.get. Before we saw that this is a JSON response. Let's go with the response to JSON. Here we can see that origin equals 39.72.88.70, which is probably the IP address of this Replit instance. So everything is correct. That's it for my workshop. Is there any questions? Stop sharing.
Cool.
Okay, if there's no questions, I'm going to end this. If you need any help, be sure to contact me and I'll be able to help you out.